Our next presenter is Jasmine Burns, Head of People at Censys, a growing cybersecurity startup in Ann Arbor. With over 10 years of human resources experience, she was previously with Duo Security and 4C Results. Jasmine is a regular speaker for Venture for America, Hacker Fellows, and presents on topics around recruiting and D&I. She's passionate about evangelizing people-first cultures. Let's hear what she's learned about D&I from employees that she couldn't have learned anywhere else.
Hi everybody, I'm Jasmine Burns. I'm head of people at Censys in downtown Ann Arbor. We are a cybersecurity company with about 50 employees and just closed our Series A funding round a couple weeks ago. So excited to climb yet another big mountain ahead of us and see some more success. I'm excited today to share with you some learnings that I, as head of people, experienced in the last few months surrounding diversity and inclusion, specifically around some of the things that my employees actually taught me that I wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. So no secret, you can find a lot online today. There's so many resources and consultants on diversity and inclusion work, but actually some of the lessons that my employees taught me, I think, were the most profound and the most heartfelt. So without further ado, the first learning retrospective I'll go over, probably what I would call my most overarching, is the philosophical question of what role an organization should play in societal issues is still up for debate. So in speaking with my father-in-law a couple of weeks ago, we were exchanging kind of our own experiences within our own organizations and talking about, the letters that our CEOs were sending out and the town halls that were happening and the conversations that were happening. And he actually works for a multi-billion-dollar top automaker in the world. And I had this epiphany that what we are experiencing at a measly startup of 50 employees and what he's experiencing at a global enterprise really wasn't that different. That there's still ambiguity and there's still an unanswered question of the role an organization should play. So what my employees taught me is that it's not really that important that this is still an unanswered question. What's more important is that we need to take a stance and we need to advertise it, both internally and externally. And the reason for that, I think, is that I know that this question will never be answered, or at least not anytime soon. But what I do think we can do as a society is allow employees to make the decision of whether or not they want to work for an organization because their values align or don't align with that company and the stance that they take. If you have a culture of psychological safety, your employees will speak their mind on those issues. So if you're unfamiliar with this concept of psychological safety, it's basically the ability to create and foster a culture and an organization where people can ask questions, speak their mind, and not be afraid of negative consequences at all. And typically this concept applies mostly to business. However, I realized, my employees taught me, that this concept actually applies even more so to things like diversity and inclusion. D&I work is probably the most emotionally charged conversation you'll have in the workplace today. And if you have psychological safety, your employees will speak their mind and they will have their voices be heard. And that's a really amazing thing. What I will caution you is that you need to be prepared to respond in a thoughtful way, because if you don't, you will actually remove psychological safety on the business side. You have to create and protect that space for open dialogue, genuine listening, and real support. So if you work somewhere where psychological safety actually isn't a thing and you are not fostering that in the environment, I would encourage you to look it up, because it is proven and studies show that it leads to exponential business outcomes. However, at minimum, and in the meantime, you have to create a space where you can have open dialogue, where employees feel like they can show up, talk about how they're feeling, ask questions, and talk to leaders directly. But actually what is most important, and thank you to my employees for teaching me this, is your leaders have to show up as genuine listeners. That cannot be emphasized more or enough. So if you have leaders that are showing up to these conversations or these open dialogues and they're monopolizing the conversation, your employees will start to feel like, actually this space is not protected. And I just don't feel like I'm supported to just come in and talk about how I feel on this stuff. So important for you to just listen. Next learning. This one is a little bit of a personal learning for me, and I'm gonna get kind of vulnerable for a second. So I'll go back to kind of the beginning of what we know as the modern movement around diversity, inclusion, and social injustice. And I remember replaying this thing over in my head, this idea of like, I'm not an expert on this stuff. And I've been immersed in D&I, and I have some amazing mentors who have taught me a lot about diversity and inclusion work. But I am not an expert, and I felt a little bit like an imposter. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to steward my employees through this stuff. And I think I assumed that because I'm not an expert, my employees definitely aren't experts. And that's probably true. But what's important is just because they are not experts, it doesn't mean they don't have good ideas. And I'm really thankful to the employees that voiced the ideas that they heard, because I realized something in this conversation. That if you have employees that are passionate enough about the ideas that they have, they're probably going to champion it. And if you're a team of one like I am, or you have limited resources for diversity and inclusion, you have somebody carrying the work and the effort behind that. And that is an amazing thing. Executive and leaders might not have the answers. Of course they don't. They're human. But what I think is probably the biggest takeaway here, and what I realized and my employees pointed out, is that they might not be on the same page. And what I'm realizing and still learning is that everybody is on a different part of their journey when it comes to learning and educating themselves about D&I and about social justice and equality. And that goes all the way up to the top. And I realized, and my employees showed out, that just because they're executives doesn't mean they have all the answers. That reigns true on pretty much everything, but especially on something like D&I that is, coinciding with this new world of work and showing up more and more, especially in the summer of 2020. You have people that come from all different types of experiences, all different types of backgrounds, and they definitely won't be on the same page, at least not in the beginning, until they've had conversations, and they might not ever be on the same page. And that's important to realize as an employee. Don't bucket your leadership into certain philosophies or certain ways of thinking on all of this. Another reminder, more than a learning, actions speak louder than words. They do every time. However, showing up hollow or imperfectly could have a negative impact. In fact, it most likely definitely will. So I'm thinking back to what you all might remember as Blackout Tuesday. And this was probably the day in the summer where social media was at its height in terms of the conversation. And a lot of employers were posting things like, we stand with our Black community and, Black Lives Matter. And a lot of our employees were kind of asking, why are we not posting anything? And I actually started to get a little bit frustrated and kind of confused on who I needed to talk to make this happen, and how do we come up with the right thing to say that makes sense for us at Censys, at my company. And in speaking with a leader kind of later on in the afternoon, I realized, we all have to get us aligned on the same page, like I just mentioned, but showing up and not being either that genuine listener or showing up hollow could actually be way worse than not showing up at all. And I'm grateful for kind of the compassion and the empathy that our employees showed. And it was a big learning for us. And lastly, what's right for your organization might not be right for another. This couldn't be more true about anything, actually. What's really important, and I would challenge every organization to do, is think about your own strategy and how that aligns to your own values as a company and areas in which you are most passionate with. So I'm gonna go take us back to the initial days of the movement and talking to one of my leaders. And I said something like, why don't we just put something out on Twitter? Or why don't we just start a targeted effort to hire more Black employees? And they actually made me realize that this person held a passion around systemic racism and poverty, and said, I really think that we should do coding boot camps, and we should, mentor youth in the community that might come from underprivileged backgrounds. And I realized that's actually where we can affect change right now in this moment. And just because other CEOs on Twitter or in social media are doing things, or you're seeing other companies do things, it doesn't mean that it's right for your own organization. So I would challenge everybody to think about their own values and make the decision of whether or not they align with your own. Thank you for listening, and please reach out to me if you have any questions. And remember, we're all in this together.